Hi, Ben. Morning.
Okay, good morning. It's 8 o'clock in the morning in Manila and in the Philippines. So I'd like to welcome all participants to the REC 14 roundtable about science journalism. As we know that science journalism is a very important media activity these days with a lot of science-related topics, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic and a lot of information around circulating on social media and on mainstream media about the issue. The need for science reporting, it has become more needed at this time, especially when the vaccines are going to be rolled out. So with us today are three very well-known Filipino science journalists. Miss Christine Sabilio, who's a multi-platform reporter from ABS-CBN, and Mr. Timothy James Dimacali, a science writer. He's more popularly known to a lot of people as TJ, and Miss Fatima Arkin, a science journalist who's a longtime contributor to SciDev.net. So I'd like to give the opportunity to for Dr. Windel Rivera, the chair of this REC, to to give some welcoming remarks and to introduce our speakers.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the PAASE Rec 14 Roundtable discussion on science journalism and communication. Now, for the information of everyone, I think most of us here are PAASE members, but Rec 14 is the research expertise cluster of PAASE on education, media, and museology. Now, this rec is being led by Dr. Benjamin Vallejo Jr. and yours truly, Windel Rivera. Now, this morning's event is really timely and significant. And as mentioned by Ben earlier, we will be hearing from the experts on science journalism and communication, their journey in this field, and the challenges that they face. Now, we are fortunate to have with us this morning three well-known young journalists. And thank you for accepting our invitation. So let me introduce them briefly. First, we have Ms. Christine Sabilio, a multi-platform reporter of ABS-CBN who will share her experiences and talk about science communication for the general audience. Second, we have Mr. Timothy James Dimacali, or TJ, a science writer of the DOST Science Education Institute, who will speak on prospects for science communication in the Philippines. And last but not the least, we have Ms. Fatima Arkin, a multi-awarded science journalist and contributor to SciDev.net, who will speak on the future of media, the rise of freelance science journalists, and how to engage with them effectively. So this is going to be an exciting discussion. Okay, so let's turn over once again to Ben, please, to facilitate the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Windel, and I will now give the floor to our three science journalists. Uh, Perhaps I can begin by asking our science journalists to tell us more about themselves and the work that they're doing, and why did they decide to go into science journalism. So perhaps we can get the ball rolling. If maybe Christine, what are your insights about this? How did you get into the science journalism?
Yes. Thank you again for inviting me to speak to you today. I guess I started out in science journalism through covering environment. I was really interested in climate change reporting, and I attended a series of workshops when I was still with Inquirer. I covered the Paris Climate Agreement, and through that, I realized that I had an interest in writing about more technical aspects of science. So not just like features, but really discussing, for example, the science of climate change. And it was through that I started exploring other topics in the field. And when I joined ABS-CBN in 2017, that's when I started really doing science features. I'm going to share maybe later the things that I've done. And I guess in 2018, 2019, I did a series of features on women scientists. And then I also did a couple of articles on space and the efforts of our engineers in microsatellites. And in 2020, I was assigned to cover the eruption. So I was assigned to FIVOX. I did a lot of science reporting there. And then the COVID pandemic happened, and I was assigned to DOH and DOST. So since then, I've been covering the COVID pandemic and trying to, share the voice of our experts on it, because I think they're the most credible people we should be listening to at this time. So that's what I've been doing right now.
So, Christine, you have a degree in journalism from UP, and you took your master's in Ateneo. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. When you did your journalism studies, was science journalism really part of the curriculum? Is it really built in, or pardon me if if I'm a little bit ignorant on it? But this is a question that I always wanted to ask a science journalist. Did you take the science courses in journalism in Jordan School, as they say?
There was I don't think there was a concept of science journalism when I was in UP more than a decade ago. But thankfully in UP, we get to take general education subjects. And I guess in elementary, I was interested in science, in physics, for example. But it was something that I really dropped, I guess, when I started getting interested in writing. So I focused on English, for example. But in UP, I actually watched An Inconvenient Truth. And that was the one that triggered my realization about the importance of, discussing climate change. And after that, I took a GE on environmental science. It was one of the subjects being offered at the time. I don't know if it's still being offered as a GE subject. But that gave me, I would say that gave me the foundations of, um, learning about climate change, the difference of global warming, and stuff like that. And of course, other subjects like geology. Remember, Professor Mahar was my professor back then. So I think it's helpful that you're familiar with those things, but there really wasn't a subject on science journalism, and I learned along the way as painfully, I may say, when I was writing. So it's been an interesting journey for me. I think the journalists now are lucky because science journalism, I think in some journalism schools, are already being given as an elective or at least a seminar course. And I've given a couple of talks already with students. So it's helpful that they have all these opportunities now to learn about it.
Thank you, Christine. And so I'll ask Fatima. How did you decide to go into science journalism? Was your first interest before? Fatima, you're still on mute.
Darn, I thought I got that out. Okay, well, hi first. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, science journalism. So my background is actually in the arts, and I'd like to say this is sort of a happy accident. I say the arts, I studied history and international development, as well as economics in Canada. And how I got into this is similar to Christine. I also have an interest in environmental reporting. I wish I met you at COP, Christine, because I was also there. I hope we meet on the field at some point in the future. But I came to the Philippines actually in 2013 to report on Super Typhoon Haiyan. for mainstream media in Canada. So that's how I got involved with climate science, which is a personal passion of mine, as well as science reporting. So I was reporting on the ground in Tacloban, Manila, and all the affected areas. Yeah, and so I developed, I guess, a love for it as I was going along, and meeting all the fascinating scientists and researchers. And now I've been here for, I think this is my 8th year. So I've been here for 8 years, reporting across the Philippines as well as across the region on science, climate science, but also other types of science. And I think it's the people that really have helped me develop a love for it. And I'm just constantly amazed about the interesting science we're doing here that isn't so well reported in international media. And that's something that I want to help elevate.
So, Fatima, you said that the science is not really reported in international media.
Oh, Filipino science.
Oh, Filipino science. Yeah, because there's a lot, I know.
Of course, yes. Well, because I report for predominantly international media. So SciDevNet, for example, is a science and tech news site based in London, England. And they're specifically focused on the developing world. But I also write for Science Magazine as well as Foreign Policy Magazine. So I'm enmeshed in that group, but I feel that when I talk to scientists here, there's just so much more interesting things that are happening that we don't hear so much in media in New York or Washington or London that I think really needs to be, communicated there.
Thank you, Fatima. So now for last but not the least in our Rose Among the Thorns, I'll give the floor to TJ. So how did you really get into science writing and science
Hello.
journalism?
Yes, good morning. Well, I know. Well, first of all, I've always appreciated science, even as a kid, and early on, I'd say I'm a huge science geek myself. Um, but when I came to college, to make a long story short, I had wanted to get into actually back in the day, com sci was the in thing then, right? So, but it's a quota course in UP, and my parents were both alumni, said, it's tough getting in, take a non-quota course, then shift into it, they said. So I thought, hey, what do I like to do? I like to write, so I guess I'll do that. So I got into creative writing, and I didn't look back, so I graduated an English degree, 20 years ago, which which is quite a while back. So for most of my early writing career, I had done freelance writing, public relations, advertising, even. And then fast forward to 2009, GMA News Online had an opening for what was then a very new position. This was multimedia, someone to figure out, their social media of the site at the time. Everyone at the time, if you remember, Facebook was still such a new thing. Everyone didn't know exactly what to do with it. And I had the experience, so I came on board and was doing that at first. And then later on, I was offered an editorial position for what was then technology news section of the site. And that's where things clicked. I said, a lot of other sites have technology sections, and not that we don't have anything that covers science, particularly local science. So maybe we should do that to differentiate ourselves. So we established the science and technology section, which is still going strong today. And that plotted the course for me over the next decade. Eventually, I left a few years ago to take up my master's. I came back, and now I am currently. I think the pandemic was a big factor in that as well, where right now my efforts are shifted towards STEM education and writing about STEM for general audiences, although I still write news every now and then. But all of that is informed by number one, a love for science, specifically an appreciation of science as a framework or a science approach to understanding the world.
So TJ, I know you went to MIT for a master's. Is it in science writing or journalism?
It was in science writing, yes.
So when you were there, what did you notice as differences in how it approached in journalism, the science issues, as compared to here in the Philippines or in our region in ASEAN? So what did you notice? Is there any differences in how
Well,
it
that's a
handles
very
that?
good question. No, most of the, well, for one thing, sa states, of course they have space for science writers in particular and science journalists in particular. No, it's an industry that's well established there, including publications. You've got the whole ecosystem already set up, which is not so much the case here, specifically in the Philippines. No, in Southeast Asia, at least, you've got Asian scientists, also founded incidentally by an MIT alumna. Um, and SciDev, of course, has a large footprint in the area. Um, Indonesia, I also know, has strong science journalism. But com- if you compare this to the publication ecosystem in the states, theirs is more robust, I would say, and that goes down even to the practitioners and to the jobs that are available to them. Dito hindi pa tayo, wala pa tayo sa ganun eh. We are still traditional in the sense that a lot of the jobs that you see are towards writing, towards journalism, in what we still consider traditional media and traditional avenues of reporting.
Yeah, good. We'll get to those issues in a little while. I think our speakers here have some slides to share because this would show more in detail their particular areas of interest. I think Fatima, you have a slide to share. You're still on mute.
Sorry, I'm muting myself so I don't interrupt other people's talks. I keep running. Actually, I'm gonna save that for the end. So that's an
Okay.
initiative that
Yeah.
I'm launching.
Yeah.
So I'll save that till the end if that's okay.
Okay, Christine, do you have a slide to share?
Yeah, I just have, if you're okay discussing now, I guess, the stuff that we've done.
Yeah, sure.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to share some of the things I've done for ABS-CBN. Let me just share. Okay. Can you see the?
Yeah,
Is that better?
yeah.
Okay. So I guess what people should know about ABS-CBN, it's one of the, well, now we're only online. I do both video and writing for ABS-CBN, and because we're a very big news organization, we actually have different audiences for different platforms. And I primarily write for the online news, so it's primarily in English. These are people who have access to the internet. But I remember in journalism school, we're always, our professors always tell us that you need to write for grade 6 students. Regardless if you're writing for a broadsheet or, for TV, the level of understanding should be easy enough for a grade 6 student to understand what you're talking about. So that's something that I've, remembered throughout, especially now that I'm working in mainstream media. In TV Patrol, it's our flagship program. We're still online on Facebook and YouTube, and we actually have a good following despite not having a franchise. But it's in Filipino language. So when I talk to scientists for TV Patrol, I always remind them to keep their quotes short and in Tagalog. It's quite a challenge for a lot of scientists. I realize to speak in Tagalog, so I asked them to speak in Taglish. And we're not able to go into much technical details because a TV Patrol report is 2 minutes maximum. So you just really give what the information that's needed, especially if it's public health, for example. You can't really get into the science that much, but it helps having an expert tell people, this is something that you need to do. And then of course there's ANC where we have more leeway when it comes to more technical discussions. That's on cable as well. So here I'm just going to show you some of the things I've done. I think science journalism should be something as basic as just explaining phenomenon that people are talking about on social media, for example. This is just one day when I went out and I saw it was really foggy or hazy, and then I saw people posting about it. So I just texted UP professor working with Environment Institute, and I was asking, okay, is this related to the Taal volcano? So I just wrote that, and that gained a lot of traction online. So it's not news in a sense, but it's educational for people. So just setting it straight, what really was the cause of that, and then I did a series of features on women scientists in 2019. That's how I met Dr. Gisela. I was asking my friends in other networks, si Shai Panela, I don't know if you know her, another science communicator. And I was asking for, can you help me out? Give me a list of women scientists. And I realized there were a lot because I was just starting out in science reporting at the time. And, I could come up with more than 10 features maybe. So I realized there is a lot of topics to pursue, a lot of people to feature in science in the Philippines. And it's such a pity that it's not being explored by newsrooms. Here's an example I gave. There are a lot of interesting stuff happening at the OST, and I'm so glad that TJ and other former journalists are joining the agency, because I feel like some of the press releases are not as catered to the general public, and of course the journalists who are not really scientists. So here's an example of a press release I saw. I guess it was a slow news day, and I was looking for stuff to write, just short news. And I saw this one and I said, okay, this is quite interesting because it's like a portable PCR machine. But the way it's written, it's so technical and all those acronyms. The other journalists from other newsrooms did not really appreciate it, and no one ran the press release. And I remember seeing the DOST send it again a few days after. And I said, okay, let me go through this and see what I can do. And then I wrote, I made it, simplified to say that, PH scientists are actually developing smaller, cheaper, those are the keywords, smaller and cheaper PCR machines to help boost COVID testing. And that did well online, and other news agencies picked it up, so you really just have to make it more understandable. This is another story that was from the Manila Observatory. And I remember being assigned to this forum, and then I wrote this article just based on the talk. And then TV Patrol said, can you do this story for us? I said, well, it's the last day of the program. Why didn't you assign it to someone else before? And then I learned that it was actually assigned to our regional correspondent who actually went to Clark to see what was being done. And then I received feedback from an editor that they didn't know what to do with the story because it was so technical. And I guess they only appreciated it when I used the angle of, how will this impact weather forecasting and therefore agriculture and farmers. So the bottom line always in mainstream media reporting is that you need to make it a gut issue. How will this affect the Filipino, the basic masses, the farmers, the workers? So I always try to find that angle when reporting, because in mainstream media, that's always the bottom line. I'll keep the other. Do you want me to keep talking, or I can keep the other stuff for later?
Well, it's up to you. Maybe later I can ask a question.
Okay.
Okay. So good, Christine, that you already sounded out the problem of having the right audience and making the audience as wide as possible. I think these are issues that even my classes in STS are quite familiar with, but to hear it from a practicing journalist is it's much more of an eye opener. So to ask TJ and Fatima about this. No, it's about technical things are sometimes the editors don't understand it, or it's difficult to translate into what they say journalists. Okay, so I'd like to know your ideas on how we can improve or even widen the audience that that could make sense or understand all of these technology developments and scientific concepts that need to be reported. So maybe we can start with Fatima.
Sure.
Yeah.
Um, my okay. See, I'm muted this time. Great. Um, so for me, my audience is slightly different. Christine was talking about her audience, which is general Filipino audience. For me, my audience tends to be international. So the kind of stories that they're interested in are a lot smaller. Because, for example, with Science Magazine, you only have a few pages allotted to the international science section. So I'm competing with Science News from Indonesia or Malaysia and other areas. So it has to be something that really stands out. As an example, I did a story a couple years ago about the dengue vaccine scandal. Specifically, my science angle to it was when Rose Capading was indicted for that situation. And that was obviously very interesting to an international audience because scientists don't normally get indicted for their research. And also because the whole situation with Sanofi and with the dengue vaccine was so unique to the Philippines in its size and scope. So for me, in terms of finding angles that would appeal, I think I have to really look at it as something that is what is unique to the Philippines and that an international audience would be interested in. So I have a sort of smaller pool to work with compared to Christine. But I do think that there is a lot, when I do talk to scientists, I think there's a lot of very interesting things here that we are known for, that we don't really, the international audiences are not so familiar with. So a lot of our marine science research, as well as I would say things climate oriented, we really stand out on. So I'm hoping that scientists who are in those spaces will be willing to collaborate with us to be able to get those very fascinating stories out. For me, again, it's about the international angle. What would people within the Philippines as well as outside the Philippines be interested in, and working with people to help do that.
So Fatima, is there a difference between what audiences in the Western countries like the US and Europe and in Asia want to be reported?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say yes, in terms of what stories actually make it in the news. Because as an example, you know, mental health issues due to COVID. This is something happening in the Philippines as well as abroad. So unless there was something particularly different in the Philippines compared to, you know, what's happening in the US or what's happening in Mexico, I probably wouldn't be able to get that published in an organization abroad just because it's happening everywhere. Or yeah, just like things in relation to COVID, it has to be something very unique in the Philippines because then my editor will be like, well, why aren't we writing about this, you know, in the Netherlands, or why aren't we writing about this in Malaysia? So I have to kind of push them with a unique angle about what makes the Philippines a different scenario. Yeah. That's what makes it a little bit tricky for me.
Yeah. So thank you, Fatima. So TJ, how do we
Yeah,
engage our audience? Expand it.
oh, sorry. I was really nodding my head vigorously when I was listening to Christine and Fatima. In Christine's case, I also felt similar frustrations with science articles when I was in mainstream media with GMA. Two things. So, yeah, I'll deal with them first. First, when touching on some of the things Christine said, I think that's something that frustrates me really deeply. No, to be fair, we have excellent journalists, we have excellent communicators, but the thing is, somehow I think it's probably a cultural thing where when we are dealing with science, everyone's like, "Oh, I don't understand this. This is too deep." I mean, I I really feel that, which I find bewildering. Because you read the newspapers and everything from motoring. Like best example, what we have a lot of good tech journalists, tech writers. They're able to pull apart a mobile phone or gadget, whatever, talk about the specs, rattle them off. Even cars, right? Automotive. Well, we have strong automotive journalism sector. But when it comes to science in general, suddenly we're like, oh, I know this is I, I don't understand this. Let's just get a soundbite from a doctor and that's it. Let's call it a day. And that's an attitude that is has been prevailing quite a lot in media, which I find frustrating kasi kaya naman nating intindihin, 'di ba? So there's that culture for one, which needs to be changed, which needs to shift. I like Fatima's discussion earlier about bringing Philippine science to a global audience because that's something that I think we need to do simultaneously, and it's a tough job for us specifically, but also in general because we're burning that candle from both ends. We are struggling to make fellow Filipinos aware of what science is happening, what research is taking place, and its importance to us as a country, even while we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we broadcast this to an international audience? I was talking, or you asked me earlier about how the journalism landscape in the Philippines differs from the U.S., and I think that's one of the key differences. They've had a century to develop their science journalism to the point where um, this isn't a problem, right? My understanding of how it has evolved, not just in the states but elsewhere, is that there was time to focus on these issues discreetly, independently, whereas we have to hit the ground running, make sense of these two dimensions simultaneously. Mhm.
Okay, thanks for very interesting and eye-opening answers to the question of targeting and widening our audience at the same time, and the differences, cultural differences and nuances, and how traditional we are in the Philippines still with regards to journalism. Okay, which leads us to a very important point, really, is there's a lot of talk, and I keep on hearing this, that we really need to improve science literacy, as they say. We have to go back to the basic science education, or in basic education, science in basic education. So I'd like to ask our three speakers and what do you think what do we need to do for basic science to improve science literacy so that your readership or engagement in science journalism will become wider and more democratic? So perhaps we can start with who wants to go first? So
Oh, can I actually say something
yeah,
in relation to that? But I just wanted to say, because I think it also ties to what we just discussed. I really love what Christine and TJ said, because I think the flip side of that, and I don't know if you guys have experienced this, I'm curious, is I've talked to some Filipino scientists and they'll tell me, Fatima, actually sometimes my work is more well known abroad than in the Philippines. And part of that is tied to the science literacy. And I thought that was really interesting because usually you would think like you're more well known locally than abroad. But I've definitely interviewed a few scientists recently who say that I think probably tied because of that science literacy that their research is more well known abroad. And that was the case with Kathleen Aviso at DLSU, and trying to communicate what her research is. And I thought that was really fascinating, and like, what can we do here to improve that? So I'm curious also with Christine and TJ, is that something you've experienced as well?
So Christine, do you have anything to say about this in basic education? I think this is very important in your work. As you
Yeah,
said,
I feel like it's hard to. I mean, I'm looking back at my own basic education. I would have wanted a more engaging, way of, science. I don't know if, in basic education, our teachers are as. I feel like maybe on the part, this is what I can talk about on the part of journalism, maybe there is a need to mainstream science because we've always had these surveys, for example, like Filipinos are lagging behind in terms of science and math. And I feel like we need to spark, we need to inspire young kids to actually aspire to have a career in science. And that's where the role of journalism is. And Like the work I do with TV Patrol, I'm so happy whenever I see, like I did a story on the Rafflesia plants in Mount Makiling, and people said, I started getting feedback like, I didn't know we had that in the Philippines. And so like there are a lot of things that people don't know, and if we mainstream it, like they see it on television, they see it on social media. So I actually encourage scientists to actually have a presence in social media. I know of an entomologist who started an Instagram page, and she posts this really nice photos of insects. Dr. Dupo, I'm sure you know about her. And it's quite interesting because she was telling me that she was inspired to do that after I did a story on her. And it went out, and then she realized there's actually a general public interested in spiders and butterflies and all the technical stuff. The audience is out there. It's just a matter of reaching them and having that spark, and making them realize, oh, this is interesting stuff. And so it's a responsibility on our part, but at the same time, because there's social media as well, the scientists themselves can actually put themselves out there and make them discoverable for the general public.
Oh, good. That's a good idea. They say that scientists should have their own social media pages. uh, Actually, personally, I would like to put up one, but the thing is, I don't know if I'm going to be that effective. So my research program has, now whether it's effective or not, we'll have to see. So I'd like to ask TJ also about this. You're now with SEI, and I think that's one
Yes.
of the major mandates of SEI. So how would it link with the basic science aspect, SEI's work, and also in science communication?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, so actually maganda nga yung ano no, yung sinabi nga ni na Christine at ni Fatima no. As I touched on earlier, I think there's that no, we have collectively as a people, we don't tend to appreciate science, and there is a tendency to somehow compartmentalize or block ourselves off when we're talking about science when we don't realize that it it's a way of seeing things that pervades every aspect of our lives. I recall one of the insights I had a long time ago. Hindi rin totoo na wala tayong science coverage. It's just that we don't think of it as science coverage per se. You know, for instance, before we set up SciTech News at GMA and elsewhere, if you had a story on say Tesla, that would go in the motoring section, right? If you had a story on the environment, it would likely land in national news. But see, that shows that's indicative of how we do not tend to think of stories from a scientific angle. And I think part of this is also that we don't think of science as tied closely to our culture. No, much of the science education that we have is to produce workers. Instead of researchers. And I think that's crucial. No? We need to take a step back and look at how we can have people appreciate the pursuit of science for its own sake. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is looking at indigenous science, ethnoastronomy. That's one of my main points of concern now. Looking at trying to communicate science through a Filipino lens, and conversely, looking at what we have in our indigenous cultures that we can consider as science. I could probably show a slide later, but suffice it to say, right now I am involved with a project with the National Commission for Culture and the Arts to promote ethnoastronomy um, for the month of April because it's in International Astronomy Month. But this is a first, no? As even the NCCA, when we talked about this, they were quite surprised na, oh, meron pala tayong ethnoastronomy. Ano ba yon? Ganyan. They were really surprised that we had something like this. And I hope it's opened doors. I mean, so far I'm happy to say that there's a lecture to be given tomorrow. I can share the details if people are interested, but usually they have for these monthly lectures they have something like 100 people sign up When we posted about this, nasa 200 na yung interested and rising, ano. So talagang nabugulat sila, and they're interested to hopefully to learn more about that. But sorry, I go a little far ahead from SEI. So SEI, what we've seen is on a similar note, no, na kailangan natin din uh, ipakita dun sa mga bata na bahagi din ng buhay nila yung agham, no? I think that was one of the things that inspired me early on, and also why I was really interested to get into SEIs, because I remember as a kid, reading up about uh science experiments, making a barometer out of a stretched balloon over a bottle and all that, all sorts of things, playing with magnifying glass. And I think a lot of us have these experiences. Not everyone does, though. But what this did for me was, even I didn't even think about it as science per se, but it did make me appreciate that the world is understandable through this systematic method of trial and error, of experimentation, which I only later on appreciated as science. So that's something that we need to look back on. Hindi daw parang paano natin magiging experiential yung science. And that goes back to what I was saying. First of all is we can look at it as we do now with basic STEM education, or you teach kids how to do robotics, etc., the usual. But we already have that. But another dimension to that is trying to look at it through a cultural lens and making them understand that it is and can be still a part of our culture, even indigenous culture. Yeah.
Thank you, TJ. Now we have questions now from our audience. Okay, I think this directly relates to what our three speakers just have mentioned. Okay, first question is, do we have the Philippines? Does it have its own set of science influencers like Bill Nye or Neil deGrasse Tyson, or YouTubers like the Green Brothers? Do we have someone who's a popular face of science who's a scientist?
I think among the young scientists, it's Dr. Reina Reyes is one of them. She's done programs as well, and I guess because she started out as an inspiring person, and then that branched out to other opportunities. So that one is very helpful because young kids have someone to look up to and to aspire to be, and it's good that she's doing science in the Philippines.
Yeah, and I think that would answer. So Reina is our model scientist. Okay, that would answer the second question. And another question here: how can we identify a model scientist that people can find interesting? So, for example, TJ, you're working with NAST also.
Mm.
Is there any initiative to have some of our
Oh,
scientists as
the,
models
well,
for our
well,
audience?
actually, well, not directly models, no. Before I jump, I think this is where I can share a slide or two. But before I do, I want to say that's something that I have been hoping to do, and what I really recommend be done dito sa Pilipinas, no, to provide scientists with basic media literacy and training, because that's something we don't have. You were asking me earlier about the differences between the Philippine landscape and the U.S. And I think it's not just the US but everywhere else outside the Philippines. Malakas kasi yung ano nila eh. Public relations nila, aside from the fact that, science journalism is already well established. So even if you don't have, so one, of course, the most obvious, you already have scientists abroad who are more or less comfortable with the media, with social media, for one. Secondly, even those who aren't have the benefit of universities and other institutions that are able to translate their work for the general public. So, case in point, a lot of universities have in-house public relations arms that will convert everything into press releases and even videos, for this distribution and consumption. But even beyond that, you have institutions like Sciline in the U.S., for instance, which is a service basically that connects scientists with journalists. If I'm a journalist and I want to interview an expert on whatever, like something as obscure as robotics for pandemics or whatever, I go to them, I ask them, do you have an expert you can that I can interview about this topic? They will come back to me and say, hey, here's a list of people you can contact. And then the reverse is true. You know, I'm a scientist. This is my work. If there are any journalists who are interested in this field, please let me know. You know, we don't have that in the Philippines, not yet, but I hope we do. The problem is, and this is something that we've seen a lot sa GMA, and I don't know, probably sa ABS-CBN din, is okay, we need to do a story on uh, whatever. Like say, merong merong nagkasakit na hindi mapaliwanag, ganyan. Okay, we need to interview a doctor. Sinong available na doctor? Tapos yun na lang, I see Christine laughing because it's so true. Okay, who do we, like, kunwari, merong tinubuan sa balat. Okay, dapat ideally syempre dermatologist or skin expert. Pero teka, sino yung available na doktor? Ito, sige, interview na lang natin to, ganyan. And of course, to be fair, a lot of the time they're cautious, 'di ba? Na kasi hindi yun yung field nila, so they'll make these general statements and then that's it. So hindi lumalalim yung discussion. So we need to establish that connection. To answer these questions, no, it's not just a matter of identifying a scientist who looks good and talks well on social media like Reina does or Neil deGrasse Tyson. We also need to identify key experts in certain fields and connect them to media and hopefully make it common na pag merong tanong ang media, ito yung mga pwede nilang kausapin about these particular aspects or dimensions.
Yeah, that's a suggestion that I heard before because I think a few years back, and it's still under discussion, that the UP College of Science should come up with a press office of sorts in which there would be a stable of scientists who can immediately talk on certain issues that are common or are of public interest. But of course, it's easier said than done because you need to the academics have to find time, and that is becoming a little bit difficult to ask people to talk to the public. Okay, there's
Oh,
another.
sorry.
Yeah.
Before you continue,
Yeah.
I forgot to answer your question about NAST. Just to make it quick,
Yeah.
NAST is in the middle, and probably some of the audience are familiar with this. NAST is in the middle of Foresight, which I'm editing right now. Foresight 2050, 30-year roadmap for science, technology, and innovation in the Philippines. And I'm happy to say that we are going so far as to hire graphic artists to help us paint these visions of the future. So I'm glad that there's that initiative to help firm up our visions of what the Philippines can be.
Oh, that's great to hear. Now, there's a question from Dr. Aimee Del Mundo. Perhaps we should have a channel that is science technology based, something similar to PBS.org. We have that. So perhaps I could ask Christine, will ABS-CBN go into something like that, coming up with a science channel like PBS.org?
Well, maybe when we get our franchise back. But yeah, I mean, they're really. It's also like based on our frustrations, right? Like I feel like, for example, climate should be a main beat now in every country because it's going to be the biggest problem of the world after COVID. So you notice things, people should just realize that, how important science is in our world right now, in our changing world. And when decision makers, those on the top, realize that, hopefully that would, bring forth programs like.
Oops, you're mute, Christine.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just waiting for this to gain momentum. We're now and I'm sure we'll touch on this in a bit, but we're now in a very good opportunity to introduce more science topics with COVID, and then there's climate change. So I'm hoping, I can only say that I hope that the decision makers, the business owners of mainstream media organizations would realize that there's an audience for this. And I think I tweeted once about how surprised I was that some of my science articles actually went viral. In fact, I had an air pollution piece that almost had a million views on Facebook. And I realized, I told my audience that, Filipinos are interested in science. It's just that maybe the managers are not realizing it. And I if I had if I have more time to work on it, I would. But we're all constricted about the daily grind of coming up with articles. And like for example, at 9 a.m. I have to leave because I have to cover the DOH. I would rather be interviewing a scientist to go on a deep dive on something else than just reporting on quotes, as TJ said, on sound bites. But media really has to invest on this kind of education, but because I feel like that's more productive than giving a platform for politicians, for example.
Okay, so there's a comment here from Dr. Asuncion Raimundo. She says that there is a course here at UPLB, UP Los Baños, BS DevCom, Development Communication. They have a major in science communication, but they don't have a good background in science. So I don't see them as science journalists. Now, Dr. Raimundo asks, is this a problem of lack of opportunities, or it could be a lack of linkages between the science community and the mass communication and journalism community? So perhaps what would you say on that? So perhaps I can ask Fatima first. Linking the journalist with the scientist in Jordan School. Yeah.
I do think that's really important. Although I think you've also seen in this panel, not all of us started out with science at the beginning. Like Christine and I both kind of got into it later. And I think that requires a curiosity and an interest in the field. So I think also in journalism school, it's spurring that interest and inspiring those students to want to be interested more in science. I've also found that sometimes too, your background being science and then learning how to communicate also really helps, because they have a strong foundation from which to draw on, their communication, as opposed to somebody who is a general journalist and then went into science communication. But I think it's something that if you have an interest and you have a desire, can really be learned. And I hope that students will be, I hope we do our job to help them be interested in it, because it's such an important beat. I do want to mention too, though, maybe this is a good time for me to mention that slide, because I will be launching an initiative soon. If I could quickly mention it, could I share the one slide?
Yeah, I think you better share it now, because that leads to the next question from Dr. Giselle Concepcion. Okay, which is on how could we deep dive into science? Okay, maybe.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm that one. Okay, just checking. Great. So actually right now we are in the process. We're going to beta launch in a couple of months a platform called Junyo. And basically it's for green technical professionals in academia. So right now I'm actively collaborating with DOST as well as several associations in the Philippines from the engineering architecture space. And it's driven by my desire for greater communication on science and technology, because just like we had said, there's a lot of really interesting research, a lot of really interesting government funded research that in my experience, when I talk to technical professionals, they're not so familiar with. And so I really wanted to help increase that understanding in words that probably resonate with them more about green technology being done here. So Junyo aims to be basically a platform that combines all the various types of green technical professionals, but people who are four-year college degrees, but we also target electricians. We also target tester graduates. And we aim for this platform to be a more streamlined way of bridging that gap between academia and industry, but also government and industry. So I invite anybody here in PAASE who is interested, both locally and internationally. We would love to get your feedback. And right now, that's the stage. I've been doing meetings for the past couple of months, just to better understand the needs so that we can make sure that the platform really communicates their needs well. And we should be beta launching, I think, in the next couple of months. We're currently designing the platform. And I would like to get some really interesting information out before the annual UN Climate Change Conference that's happening at the end of this year. So yeah, if you're interested in giving your feedback, please do reach out. I'll share my contact information later. And I aim to also provide content as to how can scientists better communicate their research, how can they better communicate it specifically to other stakeholders in the green industry in the Philippines and abroad. So hopefully we'll get some exciting stuff coming out from there.
So thank you, Fatima. Yeah, now there's a question here about in science reporting about how about focusing on the economic benefit of science. Well, sino ba ang kumita sa science at research? This is a good point by Dr. Serafika, no? Because before logging on, something popped out on my social media account that DOST is now in negotiations to put up a vaccine plant that should be open by next year, should be operational by next year. Definitely, this has economic implications. We can supply vaccines, especially for COVID-19, where there's a big shortfall in production. And the thing is, it did not really. The news, I couldn't place it whether it's in science and technology or in on the economy. So this may show a rather disconnect between a report about science and technology and its economic benefits. So I'd like to ask the three of you, what are your thoughts about this? How can we focus on the economic aspect also of these innovations and science topics in reporting? So perhaps we can ask Christine about that.
Oh, is it okay? Because I have to leave in like 4
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah. Okay, we have to wrap up. Okay.
But is it okay if I share my slides and I'll
Yeah.
answer them briefly? I
Yeah,
feel like
sure.
when it comes to I think that's when you need to actually have a science beat reporter, and not just a DOST reporter, for example, because that's a limitation of mainstream media. We're tied to the government institutions, and someone who's actually covering the field of science would know about that. I think it requires a great deal of understanding about how the field works. For example, I'm not really assigned to the science beat. I just took on this thing. And so every time now that ABS has something science related, they ask me. It's because I volunteered to do this stories. I'm actually a political reporter. And then I said, I don't want to deal with politicians anymore. I just want to focus on health and science. So I just wanted to share my slides because I really have to go. But I think this answers Dr. Gisela's question on like how we can do a deep dive. Let me just share my screen because I just wanted to show what exactly we're capable of doing if we put effort into it. So I just wanted to share how it's important to go multimedia when it comes to science reporting because Filipinos, I think, are more driven by visual content, especially now. So for example, for this story, I just went to Mount Makiling to meet with Dr. Amy just to learn about her for my feature on her. And then they said, okay, we're trekking. And it was like 2 hours into it. And then she said, and I don't really do hiking, so I was so tired. And then she said, oh, you know what? We're going to find this Rafflesia bloom. Would you want to go with us? And I said, okay, fine, might as well, I'm here. And then we went there, and then I realized how interesting this experience was for me. And I was so lucky to be around those people, just that interest in, this flower. And I felt like I needed to share it. So I just took photos and videos while we were going there. And then I ended up writing a story. It wasn't really part of the plan. And then it even came out on Bandila, on a Filipino program. And then I was so happy because people started telling me, these students went there and they learned about it, and other groups went there to see it. And so that's the power of multimedia. I'm a mobile journalist. I have my camera crew, but when I'm not with them, I also use my phone to document whatever I'm reporting. And it's enough, I guess, to just show those things. On the on the other side of that, from using a cheap smartphone, we also do with ABS-CBN. This is the deep dive that I would want to do more, but it's very time consuming and it requires usually a web developer. So we had a special page for the Homo luzonensis find. So I feel like the international media was doing such a good job covering it. And the local media wasn't really stepping up that much. This came up much later because we only have a few people who can do this. So we had a 360 tour and stuff like that. We had a map. So I think that's helpful for people to visualize, to make them more excited with the science. Just a snippet of the explainer we did. We have a team called NXT. They're a very small team of graphic artists and producers who do videos for us for online.
Discovered in Calauquia, 7,000 years old, making them the earliest human remains found in the Philippines, even older than the man found in Palawan Island. This discovery also means that humankind's already complicated family tree now has a new branch.
So I just wanted to say that I really like their style because it's the trend right now. A lot of young kids watch YouTube, and that's how the explainers are being done. And that's something to remember. You go where the audience is, and you follow the type of videos or style of writing that they like. And this one is my last one. Just related to my COVID reporting.
Kasama, may mga grupong dapat nations na tinataglay na concern sila.
Sorry,
Yan. Variants of concern sila kasi meron silang tinataglay na mga mutations na nagkakaroon ng mga katangian para ang virus ay maging mas madaling makahawa o kaya yung tinawag natin nakaka-escape ng immune system.
Kasama sa mga variant of concern na ito ang mga variant na unang natagpuan sa United Kingdom, South Africa, at Brazil. Lahat sila mas nakakahawa umano dahil sa isang mutation na pare-parehong meron sila, ang N501Y.
Ang N501 mutation na ito ay nakakaapekto sa receptor binding domain ng spike protein. Dahil dito, ang mutation na ito ay malapit sa dulo ng spike protein. Kaya binagi nito ang hugis ng spike protein upang magkaroon ng mas mahigpit sa mga ini-infect nitong cells.
So it's a very simplified explanation, but people can get it and understand. So this one is a video on variants, mutations, so just the basics. Dr. Eva, who works with the Philippine Genome Center, we received very good feedback from her, and she said she was so happy with this. She even sent it to Harry Roque, just to explain, when they would ask. So I think we should be coming up with more efforts like this because it's the easiest way to explain complex science topics. And for me, it's so hard to imagine, what a mutation is, what a variant is. But there's also the responsibility of the scientists to make it easier for journalists to understand, and also the responsibility of the journalists to make sure that we're reporting science accurately. So it's a two-way thing as well. I'll go through this because I have to log out. Sorry about that. But as I said, Filipinos have a large appetite for science reports right now. But the challenge now is that there's a lot of noise. There are a lot of people coming out pretending to be experts in the field they're not really experts in. And on tendency, if they hear that first, they believe that. And then when we try to correct them with the science, they don't listen to it anymore. They don't try to understand. So I feel like multimedia reporting kind of helps with that. So it's really, I think, continuously communicating with the public. Eventually, they will get it. Now, I'm so amazed about how people are familiar with PCR tests, antigen tests, antibody tests. They already know this stuff. They didn't know more than a year ago. So eventually, they will understand. And I'm hoping that in the long run, all our hard work would produce more Filipinos interested in entering the field of science, or at least not easily being swayed by fake news, especially when it comes to all of this nonsense in COVID-19. So that's it. Thank you so much. I would have to go. I'm so sorry. But I will send my email. Or if you have like questions, one last, let me know.
Okay, thank you, Christine. I know you have a busy schedule for this morning, so I think we have to wrap up now. There's a lot of interesting things to discuss about science reporting and science journalism. Perhaps it would need another REC
Just just
session.
something that
Yeah.
I'd like to add. One thing that can also be done is to embed student journalists into laboratories, because that's what they are doing in courses in abroad. No? Embed them so that they can understand not just the science being produced, but the people behind it, and that's what's important: humanizing stories.
Benji, Giselle here.
Yeah,
Yes.
Dr. Giselle, yes. Yes.
Thanks, Christine. I'll share your email with everyone. Same with TJ. I'll put it in the chat box. But may I suggest that we continue a bit longer because there are many questions. You can ask, our participants to ask their questions. Sorry that, Christine has to leave now, but we could still continue a bit longer with TJ and Fatima, if I may suggest. Thanks.
Okay, no problem, Dr. Concepcion. We can, yeah, there's a lot of things here, and we haven't even touched the well, it was in Christine's. I think Christine also mentioned it, no, about one of our points in our discussion will be the challenge for science journalism, especially in the so-called post-truth world, in which science is just one of the truths that society considers. Uh, I think Christine, in her last statement, has said that eventually the truth will win out. So I'd like to know from Fatima and TJ about your challenges in science journalism and writing in dealing with this issue of alternative facts, the post-truth, and related topics. So TJ, then we'll have Fatima say something about it. So TJ.
Yeah, sure. First of all, generally speaking, people are terrible judges of uncertainty. This is something that we experienced even as way back as Haiyan, Typhoon Haiyan. But in general, even after Haiyan happened, we people every time that there is a cyclone or weather phenomena coming in, and we always have that people will always demand certainty. Uulan ba sa akin o hindi? Papasok ba yung bagyo sa Pilipinas o hindi? Oo, hindi lang ang sagot. And that is something, and it's difficult. I think that's one of the uphill battles that I personally at least have had to work with over and over again to explain ano that the and I'm sure it's something that we all appreciate in this discussion right now na uh, a lot of it is statistical, a lot of it is probabilistic in nature, no? And that translates that we see that happening even now in the COVID-19 reporting, no? You see this dimension surfacing in everything from the recent Ivermectin discussions to even early on in the pandemic about whether or not it was necessary to close our borders, etc. Kasi yun parang ang tendency, and before that, even before that, and I think this is something that Fatima might talk about at length later on, is with the whole dengue vaccination problem a few years ago. 'di ba? Kasi anong nangyayari, people and that goes back, I think, to this whole discussion about about establishing a not ideally a science literate culture, but even if it's not science literate just yet, kahit na appreciative science appreciative culture, one that hopefully at the very least understands that science isn't always about finding solid answers. It's always iterative. It's always in a process of shifting and improvement, 'di ba? Yun yung hindi naintindihan ng publiko.
So Fatima,
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually, I really like TJ's last point about how it's not about always finding solid answers, because I think a challenge for scientists is really not all research produces a concrete outcome. It's not like each scientific thing creates something that as a layperson you can see. It created like a new technology or it created a new medication, because science research is obviously, a buildup of, we're building on each other's science research, and over time we'll see the practical application of it. Or if or some of it does produce that. But I think that's like a really big challenge in science communication, because as a layperson, they have a hard time comprehending why this is relevant if they can't see the output of it. If it's something that is in a larger pipeline that may produce something interesting later on, like the internet didn't just happen after one paper, or we didn't come up with a new medication after one paper, but all those scientific research and the information that comes out of it is important for us to acknowledge and for people to build on. So I think that's also a challenge that we need to communicate to the public, and that we need to do a better job doing that. I think there's a comment here that says the collaboration of scientists and science journalists is really significant, and I cannot agree more. I definitely hope that through PAASE and through other organizations that we really try to strengthen the collaboration between the two groups. I think that's also important as well because of the rise of freelance journalists. So we talk about post-truth, but you also have this challenge of, there are many more freelance journalists now because news organizations are going through economic hardships, especially during COVID. You saw a lot more journalists laid off. So a lot of them are independent reporters. And so being able to engage with them, you also saw people who were not science journalists. Now everybody's on the COVID beat. So these people might be sports reporters, these people might be political reporters having to report on science. And so being able to work with them and making sure that that information is accurate. So I do see a lot of that, and I think that contributes to hesitation amongst some scientists I've spoken to. If you're talking to somebody who is a freelancer, their email is not, at whatever the organization is .com. Their email might be at gmail.com. And then there's hesitation, like, who are you? Are you legitimate? And I think that obviously if we have these strengthened ties, you're able to vet them better. You're able to get to know each other better. And I think that that's really key to the mutual collaboration. If you have trust that, this journalist is competent, you'll be more willing to discuss important scientific research that comes up.
Okay. Yeah, there's another comment here, and this is really relevant, really, about making scientists look like as rock stars. Because I remember Dr. Guido David, who's with Okta. I'm part of the Okta team, but I don't usually show up on media because there are people who look more like rock stars like me, especially like Dr. Guido David. Okay, so we told Dr. David Guido that maybe you should look more like a rock star so people will pay attention to our epidemiological forecasts. Apparently, he did. So this is a question: can we really make scientists look like rock stars for more effective engagement with the public? So TJ, what do you have to say to that?
Wow, there are there are lots of answers to that question. The short answer I would say is yes, But to be fair, if it eases you, if it puts you at ease rather, it's not all the burden of the scientist to look like a rock star. You don't have to necessarily bend over backwards. From what I've seen, from experience and from observation, is that the bare minimum that I think scientists need would be media training. At the very least, understanding what to do when you're approached by a reporter, or if you're on a platform, on a public platform, how to answer questions, and even something as basic and we probably take for granted as journalists, as reporters, is, projecting on camera. That will go a long way towards but towards doing that. The flip side of that is what I was saying earlier about having people in general, but journalists specifically, and this is what I think Christine was touching on also, is having journalists appreciate science better. And I really agree with Christine when she said that it's not for want of interest, and I would like to add, it's not also for want of understanding. Kasi sabi nga ni Christine, marami talaga nakakaintindi sa agham. Hindi lang natin naiisip na kaya natin eh. There's that social and I think to a certain extent psychological barrier to that. No, one of the ways this can be broken down is, as I said earlier, is number one is embed student journalists into laboratories, open up the labs to student journalists to write about it. Another way is to promote or link up newsrooms with experts, because a lot of the time what's happening is that they really don't know. I mean, Christine was laughing earlier. I saw her laughing, smiling when I was mentioning that. It's true. A lot of the time we don't have an idea of who are the go-to experts for particular sciences. So we rely on who we know and our own personal networks, right? So if there was some way, some agency, or, well, ideally it's an agency, but some entity that can point to, okay, these are the specific topic experts, then that would help facilitate, help with that regard. The last point I wanted to make about making scientists looking like rock stars is gamitin natin ang Pinoy pride. That works a lot. I mean, doon ako nanghihinayang, bakit tayo natutuwa masyado pagka merong Guinness World Record yung Pilipinas sa paramihan ng nilutong tinapa sa loob ng isang oras, 'di ba? Parang ganoon 'di ba? We are so hungry as a people for something to be proud of. And kahit na singer, 'di ba? Even a singer who's like 1/10 Filipino, uy, Pinoy yan, masaya tayo, 'di ba? We should do the same for our scientists. One way to do this, and we've done it in GMA before, is to look at what research is done abroad by Filipino scientists and highlight that research in Philippine publications. Doon pa lang, the fact na a Filipino did something on the international stage, research on international stage, malaking Pinoy pride story yan.
So, sorry. Hi, I'm speaking again, Giselle, and I would encourage others to speak, like Al and others in the audience. I think is valuable advice, TJ, Fatima, and you can look to our PAASE members list for experts if there's anything that you would be interested to write about. It's a sortable list. We'll be coming up with a new PAASE website format, and it's sleek, it's cool. It's done by one of our techies, and I think it will be very attractive. We actually have a YouTube channel of the PAASE, but we're also planning to come up with a feature on those well, stars of PAASE. So that's the plan of our vice president, who will be president in 2022 and 23. And that's exactly our idea. But since you're talking about rock stars, also thinking that it could be the project of this rec. Uh, we're organized into research expertise clusters, but we are members of about 3 or 4 recs. This particular one is focused on media and science education for the public. So if you give us like guidelines, TJ and Fatima, on okay, so each scientist on a voluntary basis come up with your rock star photo, come up with your rock star tagline, and then what kind of materials would you put in? And right, has got to be grade 6 level understanding. At the same time, I think, TJ, what we have to address is that there's no shortcut in science. You have to understand it right, and you must know that it's not a yes or no answer. That's the whole problem with most societies that are not scientifically literate. They think it's a black or white, but science is quantitative, it's graduated, so there are gradations. So I think even for COVID, you have to underscore the uncertainty. So now there's like, you know, disagreements among scientists, and disagreements between scientists and MDs, and disagreements between MDs and MDs. Okay, as highlighted by the ivermectin controversy. So I know there is need to communicate to the public, but we must do it also cautiously, but in an attractive or in an
Right.
enticing way. I'm sure others have something to say. I hope you open the floor. There's Danny Largo,
Yeah,
there's
Danny Largo.
Alsa Rafika.
Okay, okay, so I think Dr. Serafika raised the hand first. Then we'll have the Dr. Pernia after. So, Dr. Serafika, I think you have your hand raised. You're on mute. Dr. Serafika, you're on mute.
Hala.
Unmute. There. Perfect. Now it keeps coming back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to illustrate to you guys. I was in New York. I'm an entrepreneur. I started a company in 1996. When I host parties in New York City, people ask me, Al, what do you do? I'm a scientist, I said. And they ask me, what kind of science do you do? I make medical implants that you use to patch your brain after a tumor resection. And then they look at me and say, I'm a rock star. That's the kind of appreciation that I wanted Filipino scientists to be known for. Like Tito Mejares, the one who did Callao Cave. What do you do? I'm a cave digger. And then, what kind of caves do you dig? I actually discovered a 67,000-year-old human being, and that became a new species. That kind of pitches, guys. I don't need to look like a rock star, but I need to be sounding like one to get people interested. And that's what we need to do. How to do it on paper is the challenge. To me, I can get people interested when they talk to me. I'm excited enough. I'm energetic enough. But we need to do that for a lot of other scientists who can tell their stories and be able to make them alive on paper or in video. More and more, we need, TJ, more hundreds like you. Like Jeb always tell me, Al, we need 100 like you. No, we also need 100 TJs to broadcast the other 100 scientists that have equally interesting stories. So with that, I have to sign off. I'm actually on another call already, but I just wanted to say thank you to you guys, and let's work together. I'm ready to be briefed on how to engage with media any day, anytime. Just name the time and place. Thank you.
So, Dr. Pernia, I think you have something to say. You're on mute, sir. Great.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I was kind of interested in on the latter part. Christine Sabilio Bayon said something about the Filipinos now have a thirst for science and science information. Yeah, but I think that's a limited part of the choir. What I'm interested, what we need, I think, is to really make science and technology and innovation more accessible and understandable to the bigger public. And I'm disappointed that our media enterprises like the TV networks, and even the written, the dailies, they don't contain science material. I mean, there should be a section in major dailies on science and technology and what has been happening, who are the rock stars, and what can people gain from the from science and technology innovation. And that is not happening, and that is why we are not advancing in science and technology and innovation vis-a-vis our ASEAN neighbors. And as you know, spending on science and technology is very low, the lowest in ASEAN. It's really very low. It's something like 15% of 1%. And Vietnam is doing better. It's close to 40%. 40% of 1%. And Thailand even closer to 1%. Malaysia also 1%, which is the UNESCO norm. So there is not enough interest. I'm saying this from my, I've been in this field trying to promote science and technology. I'm not a natural scientist. I'm in the social sciences. I'm an economist, but I'm very interested in science and technology because it is really the thing that will drive the economy to self-sustaining, inclusive development. Self-sustaining. So in the long run, we hope that inclusive development will materialize. But this is not happening because I think many people, especially the general public, the wider citizenry, they are still not cognizant. They are not aware of the developments in science and technology. For example, I've been trying to inveigle ANC, CNN Philippines, and also TV5 to invite to host some for scientists like Al Sirafica is one, and then we also have Joel Coelho, an expert on vertical farms. Vertical farms are what we need because we are lacking in so many things, especially vegetables, and vegetables are important for healthful living. And the other person that I've been wanting to get hosted in these TV shows is Rigoberto Advincula, who is an expert on 3D printing and additive manufacturing, which is really going to revitalize and make a big dent on our manufacturing footprint, because we have been lagging behind in manufacturing. And but then these people they say, oh, we're interested, but they never get back to to asking me to connect to them so that they can be invited. So this is a disappointment that I've been harboring in myself, and I don't know how we can really publicize, we can really democratize science and technology, meaning not just a few people who are who, I think Christine Sabili was talking about a few people, and also even Benjamin Vallejo and Fatima. They're just talking about a few people who are familiar with science and technology. We are interested in getting the public, especially politicians, national leaders. They have to be sensitized so that there'll be more budget given for science and technology and so on. So that is the magnum opus that we still need to have to get started on. And If we don't do that, then we're going to continue to lag behind our ASEAN neighbors. As you know, in terms of publications and patents per million population, we are also at the bottom among ASEAN countries. So let us do something about this. And you journalists and media people, you have to step up to the plate and not just be focusing on a few people who are already interested in science. Let's make this thing more widespread, especially politicians. Importante ang politicians in the executive and legislative and judiciary branches of government. That is what we need. In other countries, politicians and the general public are more sensitive now, more sensitized to science and technology, and that is why they are advancing, and they have been overtaking us one by one. So thank you. I just wanted to make that point because that really needs to be said here, and that's the reason why I participated in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pernia. There is a question from Dr. Danny Largo. He has a question to our speakers. Do you have some tips for our science students who might be interested to also double and even shift to be a science communicator or journalist? So I can throw the question to TJ and Fatima and anyone who would like to respond. Yeah. Do we have courses that are actually you be a science major and you have a minor in journ? Do we have it here in the country? I'm not so familiar.
Not that I'm aware of. But sorry, Fatma, would you like to answer first?
Sure. I think TJ could speak about like the domestic situation. What I can help provide is, even if it's not happening locally, there's actually a lot of really excellent resources online. So I could share some of those. I have a good list of those. But yeah, there's a lot. I actually find that science journalism, there's actually a very robust, Open Notebook is a really good one. There's a lot of really robust information available and video chats. Open Notebook also has, I think, TJ, they launched a new series of like how to find a science story, how to find like a good angle. So these are all universal. And I think that's what's great about the internet is that even if it's not being taught in your school, or if you are an educator, there's a lot of assistance out there. And that applies both in the Philippines and globally, because science reporting is science reporting. Oh, you put two N's.
Yeah. It was the wrong URL, the open notebook. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I think TJ and I can come up with like several others. There are definitely, Open Notebook is the big one, but there are a lot of really free online things that might be able to help you also as a professor in educating your students.
SciDev itself, I think, has a free course, if I'm not mistaken. You guys have an online course.
Yeah, there's definitely, because as I mentioned, SciDev is specifically about science and technology in the developing world. So we definitely have resources for that. And again, I'd be happy to share that. Honestly, there's so much out there. I think more than in other industries. I'm actually very surprised and always impressed by that.
Yeah, to add to what you said, and also going back to Sir Ben's question, do we have local courses? No, not yet, as far as I know. Earlier in the chat thread, someone mentioned DevCom in UPLB. That's the closest that we have. And from what I've seen, a lot of it is technical, and I think they've got the building blocks down pat already, But I think what's missing is the kind of popular writing that one would find more in, say, mass communications or journalism courses, which is why earlier I mentioned, and I really hope we can do this, sana sa UP or in other universities, na if you have a journalism course, perhaps you can nudge your students to look at stories in the research uh in the research arms. Sayang kasi they're right there, you know. Um like for instance dun sa MIT, that's what they did, no, na of course MIT is a huge research institution, but to their credit they have a humanities school, and all of the students who go through their science journalism courses, both undergrad and masters, they are required to embed themselves in a lab so that they can understand the output and the culture, and they're tasked also not just to write about what the labs produce, but also the personalities in those labs. I think that is one of the concerns here. Ano? How do you pulling down the question of making a rock star? Bago mo gawing rock star yung scientist, make them human. Yung hindi nakikita kasi ng publiko eh. The public doesn't see the human aspect of of science. It's a black box to the public in general. And one of the ways you can do that is yun, sana if you have scientists who are comfortable with social media, that would be great. But it's also a task for the people the science communicators mismo, to write about, even general journalists, like we've seen Christine and Fatima also. Miski ako, no, we all didn't come from science backgrounds, but we gravitated towards it. So hopefully there's some venue where we can nudge people in that direction. Yeah.
I think Dr. Pernya, are you raising your hand? You're on mute.
So,
Here.
okay, I was expecting some answer, some response to my comment, which I think it's a serious deficiency we have in our country. Because you're just talking you're talking about issues among scientists, among students. I'm talking about the general public, especially political leadership. They have to be sensitized. Otherwise, we are not going to move very fast in terms of science and technology and innovation.
The topic of I think we can have another REC on the policymakers and the politicians. From my experience, I have only been approached by the staff of one senator who is interested in improving or strengthening our capacity for giving government science advice during times of emergencies, as what's happening in the COVID. I think it's Senator Bongo's office has approached me about this, although this is not really a science journalism topic. It's to improve our engagement of scientists in providing science information and advice to the government in terms of crisis. Maybe the idea was to formalize, to have certain structures building on the present ones that we have, like what we have at the NAST and the OST, and build more structures or processes that would make it efficient for science to communicate advice in emergency situations such as this one. As far as I know, he's the only politician that's directly approached me. And I don't know about the others. If the other scientists here, if you have the policymakers or the politicians have approached you on a specific topic, maybe that's a nice focus for discussion. We can discuss it now, or maybe we can have a more thorough discussion at another time.
Angie,
Yeah.
I think what Secretary Pernya would like to hear is the response or comments of our two guests. They might have, a response to this question. So maybe we could hear
I
from.
think Yeah, I think I have a little something to say, and I think this is a great time for me to share just one of the 7 slides that I prepared. Ito. So, Right right now, I am in the middle of editing Pagtanaw 2050, and I think some of the audience might already be familiar with this. The foresight, Philippine foresight document for the 3 decades up to 2050. But what I wanted to share here is that to the NAS's credit also, I talked to them, sabi ko, when I looked at the document, my task was to make it understandable. We understood that a lot of stakeholders were also scientists, industry leaders who would be comfortable with the jargon, But we also, I was also frank and said, if we want this to work, if we want, LGUs, if we want to LGUs to pick up on it, we have to make it pretty. So what you see on your screens right now is some of the concept artwork that that we commissioned for the foresight, because the idea for me was that given this extent, right now it stands at almost 400 pages, and it's going to balloon even further in the coming week when we finalize it for submission. Is that not everyone is going to wade into it, and if you plop it into say a mayor's lap, or someone who is not scientifically literate, they're not going to look at it. But if you give them a pretty picture to look at, that might convince them. I joke, half jokingly, inisip ko, sabi ko, kung si Manny Pacquiao ba ang magbabasa nito, paano ko siya i-interest to read this, 'di ba? I think that's it. Parang basically what I'm saying is I am cautious not to say na I'm not saying na tanga yung mga tao at hindi nila kayang intindihin. But we need to look at soft entry, as it were, places of where their comfort zones are in terms of understanding and accepting information, and look at how we can make inroads through those entry points. Which is why I kept going back earlier to popular communication, because this is what the general public as a whole, which at least for me is my target audience, that is what their comfort zone is, diba? And then going into that. So I don't know if this answers Sir Pernia's points, no, but I think aside from making rock stars, or making, even just like I said earlier, making people of scientists, making people aware that scientists are people too, interesting them in what research there is. One of the easiest paths to do that, of course, is to say, okay, this research could lead to XYZ, right? That's one of the simplest ways to do it. We're researching this nanomaterial because we can use it to build this and this and this. That's the easy route. But another way to do that, and this is the more difficult route, but I think will have gains in the long term, is to build that wow factor, that dimension of yung of awe and inspiration. One of the things that I always looked at when I was doing the foresight, and also which I hope to do moving forward in my work as SEI, is I always look to NASA, how NASA does its communications, right? I mean, they are in the problems that NASA faces as an institution are things that we face all the time, right? Kapos tayo sa funding, people are skeptical, people don't understand what science involved. It seems to have no immediate impact on the people. Gutom sila, bakit tayo magpapadala ng mga tao sa space, 'di ba? But the reason why I think NASA is doing great work is precisely because it has a strong public relations arm. It has all of these little initiatives that add up. Things as seemingly inconsequential as opening a website to the public to buy a Mars ticket, right? Where they said, okay, you just put in your name, and we'll send your name on a microchip when we send our latest rover to Mars. But that was a low cost initiative, but it fired up public imagination. And even in GMA, when we did a story on the missions a few years ago, that was a very viral story. A lot of Filipino kids signed up for a Mars ticket for the novelty of it. And the other end of that is things, again, seemingly inconsequential, things like mission patches. You know, for every time that they're sending someone to space, may mission patch sila. But what this does is also it builds up this mystique, this image of them as something prestigious to the public, and that's how I think we can interest the public in general, but also potential stakeholders into buying into science.
TJ, I think you raised a point about NASA. Uh, it is the premier science agency of the United States, no? Which has the most public face because the Academy of Science doesn't have as much as a public face as NASA, and always in government. And as you said, how will you communicate to a senator like Pacquiao or Bongo or Risa Hontiveros or I trained under the International Network for Government Science Advice, and Sir Peter Gluckman told us that we should boil all of these things, communicate it, whether it's for media mileage or for policy, setting the policy talking points, to communicate it in a PowerPoint slide with around 4 to 5 bullet points. So your innovation paper or document will have to be translated to one slide with 5 bullet points for a senator or the president or department secretary to consider. But I think we need to integrate all of these things, the science communicators, the journalists, and the policy makers, and the academic science community in seamlessly communicating important points, especially when it deals with issues on national development and how important science and technology is to that. Perhaps that could be the next REC, government science advice. We don't have we have it here mostly ad hoc, especially for crisis situations, and that is a common thing that happened in the COVID-19 pandemic. Your scientists are advising, communicating to government on an ad hoc basis, but this needs to be more structured and formalized because there's so many voices, and some of them are spurious, as pointed out earlier by Christine. So perhaps we can come up with maybe another REC to talk about it in more detail. But that would link up public engagement, government attention, especially from Congress or the palace, and science communication and science journalism. Yeah, so I think Fatima, do you have anything to add, especially in an international context? The politicians,
Yeah,
policymakers.
I agree with everything TJ was saying. I was nodding my head a lot. And, we definitely work hard to try to find creative ways to make science intriguing to the public. Also because people have short attention spans, so like now we're just used to getting information very fast. And you have to capture people's attention, within the first sentence or within the first 2 sentences. But definitely even during COVID, there are a lot of international scientists who have hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers, and even in the climate space who have more Twitter followers than journalists do. And I think that's really back to what TJ, Christine, and I have been saying, which is really being able to communicate it well. Like really being able to communicate science in a simple and clear way. For scientists to be able to do that, I think would go a very, very long way. And that's hard. And I know that's really hard. So I think a lot of it boils down to media training and then adding the layer of creativity on it. No matter what we say or how we put it, I think media training is the basic building block to communicating Filipino scientists to the public. Because I even get told that by my editors all the time. Make sure they talk simply. Make sure they talk simply. Like if there's one note that always shows up, and this goes for Science Magazine or SciDevNet or whichever publication I'm writing for, is always get them to talk simply. And I think that's really hard for scientists to do, especially if they don't have a lot of experience talking to media. That I have to harp more than anything. And then we collaborate on the creativity part of it.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you with that because talking to politicians, you have to talk simply also with regards to science topics. Now, I think one of the I have a question for both of you and for all of us here. How much investment in time would the academic scientists need if they have to go through media training? Because some people would say I can't take time off from my research or teaching. So how much would that? How long or how much would they invest in time for media training?
That's basically, I would say, please, Fatma, please contradict me if you think otherwise, but I'd say just a day or two. 3 days is long for that. Because basically, what you're going to do is it's not really rocket science. It's basically just coaching them on how to project themselves and how to answer questions and whatnot. So that's one. The basics are there. They can be done in a day or two. What I think your this question leads to is also case to case basis then in terms of issues, because of course each issue is unique, diba? Uh, in an ideal situation, you would have either a press office or a public relations officer to talk to before you confront media, or before you not confront. I don't want to use such a loaded term to put yourself in front of media, right? Basic things like if they ask about this issue, how do we answer? How do we answer this? If we don't have enough information, what can we say about it? What can we recommend in its place, etc. That sort of thing. Yeah.
I would kind of call it also like a media etiquette. Like, what are your rights as a scientist? When you're communicating yourself, how do you make sure when you say, oh, please don't quote me, the proper way to say it is, this is off the record. And if you say that, every journalist will understand, but you have to say that before you say it, you see, because that's also
Right.
how to kind of stump you. So I think these little things could be done, as TJ mentioned, in, a day or two, just the basics. But I think it's something that you constantly work at. Just like you say, science itself is a constant evolution, that you're flexing that skill, that muscle. And the same thing with communication. The first time you talk to a journalist, you're probably going to be very nervous. Oh, are they going to misquote me? Oh, how do I say this in a simple way? And the more you do it, the easier it gets and the more comfortable you become. So it's definitely something that you have to practice. But I think there are certain basic things that all scientists should know to work with media effectively. Especially because I come across a lot of scientists who are very nervous about their work being misrepresented. Sometimes too, I think, because scientists are used to a peer review process, they're used to, vetting things. Sometimes I think they want to peer review your work or they want to vet your work. And what are the rights of scientists when they're being quoted in media? Because the thing is, you guys have ethical standards. You also have to understand journalists have ethical standards too. So it would be unethical for us to send you a full article with multiple people's perspectives before it's published, because then you could influence what other people are saying, and that would remove the independent assessment out of it. But depending on our time frame, because an article might be a breaking news article, so we have to get it out in the day. Versus if it's a feature article, so we have a longer period of time. I try to be understanding, and what I do is I will, if I have a feature article, so I have longer space of time, I can't send you the full thing, but I might send you the quotes that I use of you, and then maybe a little bit of context to know where that fits in. But you have to kind of work with the journalist, because it's unfair if I have to write this article in 2 hours and you're like, hey, check the quotes with me. We unfortunately are just like typing really fast, trying to get that out and don't have that leniency. But you can have this discussion with the journalist and be like, hey, can you just check my quotes? What's your deadline? Okay, you have a week, you have a month. Can you please do that? And I think journalists are usually amenable to that. And the last point on it too is you have to know the publication you're writing for, because I've experienced this with scientists in Australia or scientists in New York. Depending on the media organization you're working for, they have different standards. So for example, People have gotten quite savvy with press releases. So press people now, and I think it's partially because a lot of press people are former journalists. So I do notice they tend to write press releases like an article. So it's almost like it's a ready to go, you just publish it kind of a thing. And some media organizations do publish it as is, usually because, they don't have much resources, or they're low on journalists, or the article isn't, the story idea is not at a level where you would, do a long assessment into it. So sometimes I see that happening because I have it in my inbox. I'm like, hey, this sounds quite suspiciously familiar. And then sometimes, just like Christine went to do the press conference, sometimes it's media organizations are okay, let me just get quotes from the press conference and write an article. And that makes sense because you're doing a daily beat, you have to update on COVID. So that's okay. For example, with SciDev, that's not okay. So we are not allowed to just get quotes from, you are, but it must be supplemented with original quotes. So you have to have at least the researcher quoted plus an independent expert who wasn't involved in the study, but is an expert in that field to give that outside perspective. And, I had a situation recently for a COVID story. I was talking to an Australian researcher, and he was confused because he was like, well, I talked to all these media organizations, and my press person just said, give me some quotes, and we just sent it to all the media, and that was okay. And I had to say, yes, for some organizations, that's okay. But then for my organization, unfortunately, that's not okay. So can you just rearrange this a little bit, sort of a general same idea, but rearrange it. And that's because sometimes news organizations are competitive. They need to look like they're doing that on the ground reporting. So I think as scientists, you also have to be mindful that maybe your experience with me, or your experience with TJ, or your experience with Christine is not going to be the same as with another journalist, and be prepared for that. So I think these are what I call media etiquette, just like the basics of how to engage to ensure and to alleviate some of that anxiety for scientists, that you're going to get your message across, you're going to communicate yourself properly.
Okay, I think Giselle wants to ask a question.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Giselle.
Well, first, I wanted to tell TJ and Fatima that I think the biggest repository of science communication materials would be UP's TV Internet or TV app. And in fact, in that site, you will see 6 chats hosted by Benji and myself, titled Science Innovations. Now, I would like you to take a look at that site and just do a critique of how our scientists are communicating, including via Science Innovation series of interviews and chats that Benji and I hosted. My second is, I think TJ mentioned the open notebook as a platform. So maybe that is something that we should look into, everyone, because Sec Ernie, I think they also mentioned, TJ mentioned it, or Christy mentioned it, that our communication would have to be at the LGU level, local government level, and then maybe the national level. And so ideally, I think that in PAASE, we might have the opportunity to organize ourselves by disciplines, by recs, but also regionally, so that, say, each committed scientist wanting to disseminate his work could team up, say, with, connect with a government official at the local level and or the national level, and also maybe team up with a journalist that he or she would like to work with. So that rock star, who would have to be human, would then communicate, things about science relevant to everyday life, but also point out frontier science in his field. Okay, and then I think finally I would like to ask TJ, whether there is a way that you could mentor our PASA scientists in becoming human and then rock uh, scientists. Under what terms could this be done? You say it's only 1 or 2 days.
Well, yeah,
Amazing. So many are
I,
interested in this because it's a priority of SPASE.
I,
Science, education, and communication. It's a top advocacy of PASE. Okay, I will stop, with my comments here. Thank you very much.
okay.
Okay, yeah, TJ.
Yeah, I, I would I would defer to, and I recommend actually getting in touch with the Probe Media Foundation because they are they do this quite often, media trainings, both for the public and for scientists as well. They've done similar initiatives for Erie, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I think that's a good place to go. I also touch base with them every now and then, and sometimes I'm invited as a speaker. But I think they would be an excellent partner in this initiative, specifically because what they've done also is, aside from providing training for media training for topic experts, they've also the flip side is that they've also done seminars and workshops for journalists on specific topics. The ones that I recall off the top of my head was like a trans fat last year. No? So they gathered experts, they gathered writers into a venue, had speakers talk about the issues, and then they monitor how these the issues are picked up and wrote about in various publications.
Thank you, TJ. Just one comment about the journalism ethics in reporting ethics in SciDev. I think it's a great idea, Fatima, that it's not just a quote from individual scientists, but there's another independent one that will so-called review whatever was said. Actually, in the so-called post-normal science paradigm, it's considered that journalistic reports are a way of extended peer review for scientific conclusions. And I think if we're going to have it's accepted as a principle in the science communication and journalism community in the Philippines that if somebody says something about COVID, maybe something that's a little bit controversial, then there will be another viewpoint that will be published together with it. So not all the views will be represented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very important part of SciDev, and the thing that I like about its independence is that we can't just publish just the researcher. There always has to be an outside perspective, and not to say that that outside perspective disagrees with them. They could agree with them as well, but I think it's for confidence for the reader that we're not just being biased, because there's a difference between public relations and journalism. So we don't want to seem like we're just blindly promoting something. The outside perspective gives the analysis to it, which I think is important. And I think leads a reader to trust the article more, because then you know that you're getting multiple points of view.
Okay, it's 10:02. I think some people have already said that they have the class to go to. And in the US, I think it's already almost 10 or 11 in the evening. So I think I have to close our round table. It was very interesting, really. There are a lot of things that we can talk about this for hours, really. But we need to really we need to wrap up the REC. Perhaps in the next REC, this was pointed out by Dr. Pernia also about the communicating for a wider audience, also for the policy makers and the politicians. Perhaps we can have another REC on that, and I'll try to find out if I could get government officials that we can invite, or maybe there's somebody from the staff of a senator who can talk about the engagement within the and communication of the academic community and and science communicators, with policymakers and politicians. So please keep tuned when they get something organized for the next REC 14. Okay. Okay, so with that, I'd like to wish people in the Philippines a good day, and people in the Western Hemisphere, which is nighttime now in the US and Canada, pleasant good evening, and have a nice day ahead of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
goodbye.
everyone.
Okay.
Good to see you again, Fatima.
Good to see you, TJ. Keep in touch.
Yes.
So much, TJ and Fatima. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.